Hello, my name is Dr. Funda Goldman, and I'm a licensed naturopathic physician with a private practice in Stratford, Connecticut. Today I wanted to talk to you about homeopathy for feeling overwhelmed and exhausted. And we'll be going through a few Bach Flower remedies that kind of fall into this category. They include elm, hornbeam, oak, and olive. Before we get too far along, just a note, the information presented here is for educational purposes only and should not be considered medical advice. For any symptoms that persist or worsen, please consult with a qualified medical professional. Homeopathy is a paradigm of medicine that can and should be integrated, used with other mental health modalities. It's not always appropriate to use it by itself. And the other thing is, in this talk, we're discussing feeling overwhelmed and exhausted. And there can be a number of reasons or root causes for why somebody feels that way. So all of those should be really fully assessed and evaluated by a healthcare professional. This is just one potential tool to add to the toolbox to help with certain kinds of feeling exhausted and overwhelmed. So just note that before we get started here. Bach Flower remedies are considered a type of homeopathy. Homeopathy is an energy medicine. For more background and history on homeopathy and Bach Flower remedies, I've created a previous video, Walnut, which I would direct you to if you want to learn more about the background of it. But the general concept of Bach Flower remedies is that disease stems from an inner struggle. And so when we kind of undo that knot of that inner struggle, people can start to move forward in their lives rather than feel stuck. And I find that Bach Flower remedies are really especially great for people that are dealing with issues on the mental, emotional, and even spiritual level. In this talk, we're going to go through a few remedies that, as a first pass or first glance, are all related to feeling overwhelmed and exhausted. So those are the keynote, keynote features of these remedies. But as I mentioned before, Bach Flower remedies are really, really about nuance. We'll go through the 4 different remedies that I'm going to be talking about today and talk about the nuances of them, because that's really important for choosing the right one for a particular person and situation. So of the 4, just as in sort of a nutshell, the 4 that we're going to talk about, there's elm, which is really for a temporary weakness of someone who normally carries a lot of responsibility. And the key sort of inner struggle here is that the person tends to confuse their vocation with themselves. And so they kind of overdo things because of that. The second remedy is Hornbeam. Hornbeam is really more for people who feel exhausted or overwhelmed, but more on the mental level. And this is for people who take in too much stimulus or too much of the same stimulus, and then they just get sort of mentally worn down. And because they get mentally worn down, they don't feel as motivated to get things done. Oak is another remedy. And the issue or inner struggle with oak is that people are really doggedly committed to duty, a sense of duty and commitment, and they can sort of be very rigid in pursuing goals. So it's almost like the perseverance or pursuit of the goal is sort of the ends justify the means, but people can get lost, and it can be sort of a very one-sided pursuit in terms of oak people and how they get kind of caught up with things. Olive is for people who are exhausted on every level of their being, so physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and this is due to excessive effort over long periods of time. So they're just completely strained, all the levels of their being, and they're just completely gutted out, really. So again, in a nutshell, these are the 4 remedies, and we'll go through in more depth each one. So elm Bach Flower remedy first. The keynote here is for people who feel overwhelmed, but it's a temporary feeling. This isn't usually a chronic thing, and this is for people who normally handle a high level of responsibility. So this might be somebody like a high level manager who's in charge of managing a lot of people in some kind of business. And even though they normally do this with grace and ease, they may get to a point where actually even small business decisions seem to be overwhelming, and rather than kind of step into the game, they might want to just sort of check out. That's one example. This can be for a parent, especially if somebody has a lot of kids or some really kind of high need children. Normally the parent goes about handling all the different aspects of parenting very well, but they may get to a point where, even doing something simple like handling one more bath time or getting a meal together is just too much for them to bear. So that's kind of a sign that, again, normal level of high responsibility is kind of becoming a bit too much. This could also be somebody like a healthcare worker who has a lot of responsibilities taking care of others. But they may get to a point also where just one more small ailment or one more small complaint from a patient is really just too much for them to handle. And the thing about, all three of these examples is that, somebody who normally handles all this responsibility, they really start to doubt their ability to handle small, usual things. So again, they're kind of getting tripped up. And again, the key thing, the root cause of all this is that the person is over-identifying with the role that they have. So they're over-identifying with the role of being a manager or a parent or a healthcare worker, and they're forgetting their own humanness. And they're really not taking care of their personal needs first. So it's like they're putting all their energy into this identity or into this role and not really checking in with themselves in terms of like what do they personally need to create balance and ease and flow in their life. So that's really the crux of the problem for people who need or benefit from Bach Flower remedy. So as a result of taking this remedy, the potential outcome is that people have much better work-life balance, and they tend not to identify so much with their external role. And they may actually get more clarity on their outer purpose versus their inner purpose. This was a concept that was highlighted to me in reading one of Eckhart Tolle's books, is that, the outer purpose is sort of the outer persona, the outer identity, the sort of, are you going to be a cop, or are you going to be a doctor, or are you going to be, or like what's sort of the form or the filter of how your energies are expressed. But then there's also the inner purpose, and the inner purpose is more related to, regardless of if we're a cop or if we're a lawyer or a doctor, how are we showing up? What sort of inner qualities are we bringing to that function? So are we bringing compassion? Are we bringing calm? Are we bringing equanimity? So making sure, so again, if we don't have the inner purpose set correctly in our lives or within ourselves, then the outer function, the outer role can suffer because of that. So I think that's something that's noteworthy to keep in mind for people who are going through a elm phase in their life. The next remedy is Hornbeam. So the keynote for Hornbeam is that people are unable to cope with, or they resist, or they eschew normal, ordinary tasks. And this is due to really too much or the same stimulus on the mental level. So this might be something temporary, like a student who's taking exams and they're really just cramming all this information into their head in a short amount of time, and they may actually feel sort of top heavy, like their brain is saturated and they can't take any more in. This could be more of a chronic thing where somebody's taking in too many impressions and they find themselves taking in all these impressions but producing less. Or it could be a lot of external stimulation that has little meaning or enjoyment. So maybe this is somebody who, spends a lot of time on the internet, or does a lot of gaming, or it could be, maybe they're reading a lot of stuff, but it's just not something that, even though the mind is churning and taking in all this stimulation and processing it, it's really not satisfying on a deeper level. It's not satisfying emotionally. It's not satisfying, the spirit. It's not satisfying the soul. So again, even though the mind is churning and churning quite hard, it leaves somebody feeling quite pale and lackluster, really. Um, so this could also kind of show up as a mental rut, like a morning dread. Um, people who are in the same sort of grind, they see the same thing day after day, every day seems kind of the same. And after a while, because there's nothing really kind of new or spontaneous or innovative coming in, that again sparks that deeper chord with people. They may wake up in the morning and feel a certain kind of dread, like, oh, here we go, here's another Monday, and not feel really motivated. They may find, though, that once they kind of drag themselves out of bed and get going, things get a little bit better because, again, their mind is just kind of stuffed and toughed and they can't really find the motivation to get going. But they may also find themselves dependent on some sort of stimulant like caffeine in the morning to get going because they need that push to sort of, get past all that sort of mental congestion. These sorts of people, they may find that, again, they're living this sort of one-sided life and they're living too much in their head. So maybe they're reading and studying a lot, but they don't really spend that much time in their body doing physical things like exercise or walking or playing working in the garden, that sort of thing. Their emotional life or relationship life might suffer because, again, they're too much in their head, taking in all this information. So again, it's kind of this taking in all this information and having a difficult time integrating it and digesting it and integrating it to inform the life, but not sort of at the expense of other aspects of life. And this can also kind of show up as somebody's life who's like too organized and too routine. Again, this kind of gets back to this idea of, being in a rut or the same old grind or morning dread. So when somebody takes the Hornbeam remedy, then a potential result could be that they find much better balance in their mental, physical, and even spiritual soul life. They become joyful again, motivated again. They find they tend to engage in a variety and of experiences, and they become much more spontaneous. Their confidence and motivation can be restored, and then they discover their true passions again, rather than sort of rotely, mechanically going through life. They find what really lights them up, really lights up their soul. So that's a potential advantage of taking Hornbeam. In a case where, again, on the surface level, somebody's complaining of being overwhelmed and exhausted and unmotivated, but the deeper issue is that the energies of the mind are kind of overemphasized in life. So there you go. The next remedy is oak. Oak people, the keynote here is this is for people who tend to rigidly handle duties and achieving goals. And this can be temporary or chronic. And it ends up being that sort of the endurance or perseverance ends up becoming the goal. Because this is just, again, sort of rigid approach to things. And the thing is that people who are oak, they tend to have normally pretty amazing amounts of endurance and persistence, and they may even be rewarded for it. Excuse me. People may say, wow, they have so much endurance or resistance or power or courage. But the thing is that the devotion to the task or the process really lacks creativity and playfulness and kind of a heart-filled or spirited approach. So again, they're sort of in their mind and they're just sort of like stuck on this idea of completing something or doing something or keeping up some task, but the heart's not really in it anymore. They may be the kind of person who has like a 5-year, 10-year, 20-year plan, and 2 or 3 years into the plan, they've changed a lot or the environment has changed a lot. But they're just still going for the same goal, and it may not even be relevant anymore or meaningful anymore, but they're still going at it because, again, the thing is, it's just, endurance is the goal itself. This maybe show up as somebody who's like a servant parent, and what I mean by that is a parent who's just, completely devoted and dedicated to their kids, but they're coming at it from a point of view of just being a servant to their kids. So they really kind of do everything for their kids. They cook them dinner and they do their laundry and, they dry them here and there. And, when the kids are small and completely dependent on the parent, that's understandable. But, as the child matures, and they're capable of doing more for themselves, the parents aren't really adjusting. They're kind of stuck in this mode of this is the best way to be the parent. And even, it's been advised for people who have kids with special needs, like, Down syndrome children, is it really one of the best way that you can empower the children and help them as well as help yourself is to think of yourself more as a teacher rather than a servant, rather than doing everything for this kid. If you can teach them how to do simple things like maybe cook an egg or do their own laundry or help around the house, that sort of thing, it actually empowers the kids. It makes them more self-confident because they find that they're able to do things, and they learn how to problem solve and that sort of thing. And it frees up the parent. So that's actually a much better, usually healthier, more sustainable dynamic than just kind of doing everything for the kids. And again, every kid is different. But even kids who are perfectly capable, I do see some parents who kind of get into the servant role, and it hurts them. I mean, I've seen, even though I've sort of warned parents, like, you might be doing too much, you might want to kind of shift the balance, and they hear me and they say, yeah, they kind of do that. But they've literally ended up in the hospital because they're so stressed out because, again, it's not sustainable. The sort of servant role that they've created for themselves as a parent is not sustainable. And despite the fact that they're so dedicated and they spend so much time and effort, eventually the parent cracks and falls apart. And, it has to kind of learn the hard way that, again, they might have to do things differently. So that's an example, kind of more specific example of like a person who might need oak. Also, somebody who's experiencing chronic illness, again, they may need that initial, stick-to-itiveness to get through a really tough time with a chronic illness. But, at some point, it's like, where's the joy in life? Where's that spark? Where's that, just fire in the belly? It's not really there anymore, and then people feel kind of like hollow or kind of shell, or just sort of an automatic mode, and they're not really experiencing the best aspects of life. These generally tend to be people who don't complain much. They tend to be very stoic, and they may even kind of feel like they've fallen from grace a bit, and so they're just sort of in this, just kind of suck it up and do it mode, which again isn't very fulfilling or satisfying. Or you might also look. I did another video on the remedy pine, which involves kind of this aspect of regrets and blame, shame, self-forgiveness that's involved. That's kind of deep in that knot of what's kind of driving people. So you might also look at that video because, again, the oak remedy and the pine remedy may have some overlap, and you might look at that to see which one might be more appropriate for a particular person in a particular circumstance. Oak people, they don't want to seem weak. Again, that's kind of part of the identity they've created for themselves, and they may not ask for help, which is, again, can be another kind of symptom of a somewhat similar remedy pine. So look for that video. They may kind of take on this deeper belief that life is meant to be arduous and tough, and that there's value in struggling, struggling for struggling's sake. And while it is true that when people struggle and they learn and they discover new aspects of themselves, and it can be a very transformative period, at some point, the transformation's over, and it's time to move on. So, you know, that's the thing is, when is it time to kind of stick to your guns and keep going, and when is it time to let things go? Um, they might overdo it in terms of the stick-toing and part of it. So again, the goals may be achieved, but once they get to their goal, they may actually feel sort of empty, like, wow, I spent, years of my life moving in this direction, but once I got there, my life wasn't any better. I wasn't any happier. I spent all this energy. What did it really mean? Like, what was the point? So they may find that that's true for themselves. And again, they may sort of doggedly go on, but then they may have a sudden collapse because, again, they may be doing things out of a sense of duty or obligation, but there's no real deep passion for the direction of their life anymore. So once they take this Bach Flower remedy, potential result is to become more flexible, and that at different points they may reevaluate, like, is it truly in my best interest to keep going forward, or do I maybe need to shift things a little bit? Maybe I need a completely different goal. Or maybe I just need to shift things a little bit so I do find that as I'm moving forward, that I do find more enjoyment and fulfillment from my activities and my time spent. They would also potentially consider their natural impulses more rather than just sort of rigidly following through on things. What does the heart say about all this? What does the soul say about all this? What does the spirit say about all this? And how do you go about things from an integrated approach rather than one-sided approach? And life can become much more pleasant. And then again, they're considering their own desires rather than sort of rigidly following through on things. So there you go, Oak, Bach Flower remedy. And the fourth remedy here is olive. Olive, the keynote here is that the body, mind, spirit, really the whole being is exhausted after a long period of great strain. This can be after something like a lot of a long physical illness. It can be from chronic lack of sleep. It can be from a really unbalanced diet over a long period of time. It can be caretaking for a friend or relative, loved one, and it's just taking a lot of energy and time. Maybe somebody who's doing double duty, so maybe they're working 2 or 3 jobs, or maybe they're working full time and they're a parent and they're going to school. They're just stretched to the limit in every direction. This can also be after a time of deep inner development. So maybe the interior world is really shifting and changing, and somebody has to spend a lot of time doing some deep introspection and shifting to develop themselves. And so with these people, what they may find is that they kind of get to this point where, like, it's just the last straw. Like, they can't take one more step. Even the smallest task becomes a burden. Like, one more dish to wash, one more, meal to make. They just sort of really fall in on themselves. They may find that they need a lot of sleep. I've actually taken this remedy myself. It was at a time in my life. It was after my first year of medical school, and first year of medical school is really, it's just like the phrase you keep hearing is like sipping from a fire hose. You just have so much to sort of take in and learn and integrate, and you don't feel like you have any time for anything, to keep yourself balanced through the process. But I was working part-time in a hospital, a psychiatric hospital. So I was working weekends while doing my first year of medical school. And then when summertime came, I was working full-time in the hospital, and I didn't take any time off. And I remember within a couple of weeks, all of a sudden, I was just completely gutted out. Like, I would wake up, eat something, go to the hospital, do my shift, and maybe eat something again. And I'd fall asleep, and I'd sleep for like 14 hours, 12, 14 hours. Like, basically, I just ate, worked, and slept. And it was just so obviously different from my normal thing. And I really just needed that sleep. I was so exhausted. So, I guess I didn't realize how much I needed just rest after that first year, and I was just completely gutted out. And so I took this remedy, and within a few days, I felt better. But I was also like, changing things a bit. So I wasn't taking on extra shifts and that sort of thing. I was just kind of doing what felt okay to do. I wasn't really pushing it, and I was spending, once I needed less sleep, I was spending my other time doing anything else, anything that seemed helpful to me, just taking walks or going to the beach or, any sort of self-care things. And so the crux of this, the deeper kind of crux of the problem for people who need the olive Bach flower remedy is that they don't really sort of, they lack boundaries and they don't really respect their own limits. And it's also this sort of idea of coming from or working from your own individual power as something higher than yourself, or you can call it universal power, divine power, or something. They're different, people call it by different names, but when you're kind of in your own head and thinking, oh, I could do this and this and this, and you kind of create a task list and you just sort of go at it. But, the mind can be a pretty, serious taskmaster. And so, your mind can create this huge list of things to do and just sort of expect the body to keep up. But that's usually not sustainable. And again, if you do that for too hard and too long, eventually, like, you can't do it anymore. And so one of the things I learned in medical school, again, because there was so much to do for a long time, and we were actually cautioned by our upperclassmen. It's like, we're probably going to need about a year and a half to feel normal again after trying to keep up this pace. And I thought I was keeping up a decent pace. I wasn't, trying to kill myself, but trying to do my best. But yeah, I found that was true. It took me about a year and a half after medical school to feel kind of normal again, in sort of a more reasonable level of functioning. But one of the things I did discover in medical school is, like, I'd be studying and I'd have some sort of test or something the next day, and I'd be studying, and it's like, I think there's always a little bit of fear or concern. It's like, you want to do a good job and make sure you learn the material. And sometimes I would literally just like fall asleep, like face plant into the books, that sort of thing. I was just so exhausted. And what I found was that whenever I followed those just natural flows, energy flows within myself, like if I didn't have the energy to study, if my mind was too full and saturated, or if my body, needed some exercise or just a decent meal or something like that, if I followed those natural flows, things seem to work out. Like, maybe I wouldn't study as much as my mind thought I needed or expected me to do. But, when I showed up for the test, either the test was easy enough that whatever studying I did, even if it was minimal or sometimes none, like, I still got through the test. I did well. Or sometimes, like, the teacher would be out and the test would be postponed. Like, somehow it always kind of worked out. And I really noticed, because, the currency, was time and energy. That was like the big thing in medical school, is that if I really followed, my natural energy patterns, what was sort of dictated to me by what my mind could do rather than push through things, or what my body could do rather than push through things, things worked out. Kind of like the way, I don't know, I think of like birds, I mean, they're sort of directed by something bigger than themselves. They have some sort of internal compass, to fly, all the way to the southern hemisphere and back. But there's something bigger than themselves sort of guiding them to do that. And so I think when I took the Bach Flower remedy and I started seeing these things in medical school, like just following these natural flows and things working out rather than them not, yeah, I learned how to properly manage my energy in a way that was more sustainable, and it could handle the responsibilities of all that I was doing with medical school and working with patients. And it also fostered this sort of trust in, the right energy will come at the right time, when it's needed. So it was really about this concept of right effort, rather than overdoing and overstretching and overstudying and overdoing things. It's like what really is important and a priority in this moment, and what needs to be done, and what can be shuffled off to later. And how do I maintain my own internal balance so that I can maintain over the long haul a decent amount of functioning, with all that I want to accomplish. So, and there's something also about just being in flow. I think people have written books about that. Sounds familiar, but I haven't read them. But it's just really about, again, tuning into something larger than yourself, whether you want to call it the universe or nature, or divine, or God, some people might call it. It's just not all about yourself, as a little person on this big planet making all these decisions. Like, you actually you tune into that, and it's very supportive. You find that you're supported, and you find that you're guided, and it's the right place at the right time with the right amount of energy, and that you don't have to burn yourself out, trying to get things done. So those are all potential results from taking something like a Bach Flower remedy when you're feeling overwhelmed or exhausted. So there you go. 4 Bach Flowers that remedies that you can potentially add to the toolbox when somebody's feeling overwhelmed and exhausted. But it's really amazing how these remedies. I've seen these remedies even within myself. Just take somebody from this place of being sort of this dried up leaf, with no juice, no vitality, no passion, to sort of gut it out, and really bring them back to life. Bring the color back to their face, and bring the color back to their life, and with energy and passion, and getting into the flow. Things become more graceful and with ease. It's really a remarkable transformation. So thank you for spending time and learning about these, and I hope it's been helpful for you. So until next time, take care.